The economic and social impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on vulnerable groups, especially persons living with disabilities, has been tough and devastating. It's been over a year since the lockdown was lifted and everything seems to have returned to normal. Yet this vulnerable group continued to grapple with the negative effects of the lockdown, even as the pandemic progresses.
About 3 or 4 of my close friends died during that period because of objectivity.
You know, at times I will feel like, in fact, I shed tears.
My wife, as a petty trader, he couldn't be able to sell. In fact, hunger throughout the period.
In November 2021, Budget, with support from Innovation for Change Africa Hub, embarked on a 2-day visit to Enugu State to document the extent of the pandemic's impact on persons living with disabilities, as well as the support they received from the government. Many of them revealed how the pandemic affected their sources of income, mobility, and access to necessities like food, jobs, and healthcare, among others.
Generally, and particularly for us in the Ministry of Justice, remained no longer the same after the pandemic. Prices of things in the market skyrocketed, and there is no increase in salary. Before the pandemic, from my house to my place of work, I used to take a drop of about 250 naira or at most 300 naira. But after the pandemic, I take a drop from my house to my office, 500 or 600 naira. And to and fro, instead of before the pandemic, 500 or 600, it is now 1,200 or at least 1,000 daily.
You know, as a person with disability, that often and on, I must need help from people, you know, as it concerns movements. But during the pandemic, as in the COVID-19 time, it wasn't so good. It wasn't so funny. Because you may go outside there, you will try to ask somebody to help you for movement, either to enter a bus or to, you know, or to climb staircase, something like that. You know, they will be like, no, I don't want to touch, you know.
You know, being in a house without doing anything for more than 8 months, financially, it affected me because things skyrocketed. Many shops and many businesses were not on. So the little money you get, you find it difficult to take care of yourself.
To cushion the pandemic's economic impact on persons living with disabilities, the Enugu state government rolled out both short-term and long-term interventions at different periods during the lockdown. According to Mr. Onyeba Felix Uweze, the technical assistant to the Commissioner for Gender and Social Development, Enugu State, and Mr. Agu Anthony, Principal Vocational Rehabilitation Center, Emene, Enugu State. These interventions include palliative care items, provision of jobs and basic necessities like clean water, hand sanitizers, and face masks, among others.
Because I know that state government did enough in terms of giving out food items. And these food items, of course, we know include carbohydrates, proteins. And the state, of course, has a system, starting from the traditional institutions, the local government. So some people could not even afford, you know, buying sanitizer almost on weekly basis, or buying face masks on daily basis. I know very well that the state government bought thousands of face masks and hand sanitizer that we are distributed right from community to the state, and also to government ministries and parastatals.
When that COVID, the government took a prompt attention of people with disabilities. So many of them, more than 150 were provided job during that COVID. And the essence was to mitigate the ugly effects so that people can take care of themselves.
On the part of the persons living with disabilities, there was a disconnect with the processes for rolling out these interventions. As members of the Joint Association of Persons Living with Disabilities, JONAPED, claimed that only a fraction of their group benefited from these interventions. For example, according to Barrister Gab Chikwe Namani, a civil servant under Enugu State Ministry of Justice and JONAPED's chairman, only a few persons living with disabilities received food items from the government. Likewise, the jobs provided by the government were done long before the pandemic began, according to Onyema Alioku, a verbatim reporter and retired civil servant.
There was intervention, but very scant. Very, very, very scant. Let me give you an instance. A situation where some organizations like local government where we are living, they will bring a carton of Indomie, which is 40 pieces, for example, and they will share it to 8 persons with disabilities. Is it going to sustain you for 1 day, or for 2 days, or for 2 weeks?
We've not received anything from them. Even we are protesting to the government to do something for us. But still, sometimes you know what they used to do, they just share, the other people that went, they just share them 5,000 naira to leave the area. But I did not go with them, so I did not receive anything from them.
Despite the government's efforts towards cushioning the pandemic's effects on persons living with disabilities, there have not been commensurate results, as there were gaps in the implementation of government interventions. To resolve this, the government must introduce an effective distribution framework and feedback mechanisms to track the progress of its interventions. Also, beyond sharing palliative care items, the government must introduce robust policies to improve economic and psychological supports for persons living with disabilities, implement disability-inclusive structural changes to places like hospitals and vaccination centers to ensure easy access to all COVID-19 response locations, co-create measures for improving the flow of information between the government and persons living with disabilities through JONAPED and other associations of PLWDs in Enugu State.